session, we're going to have moderator Pablo Ibarrarán, who's an economist on social protection and health from the Inter-American Development Bank. So I would ask for to hold just one conversation at a time and the dialogues. If you need to converse with someone, I would invite you to please do it outside the room. There's coffee there. You can hold your conversations. So in as much as possible, try to listen as if our life depended on us to those who share their knowledge and experience with us. So thanks, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. And then I'm going to give the microphone to our moderator, Pablo Ibarrarán. Well, thanks, Francisco. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and our outstanding personalities. And thanks to Cedesol for inviting us to take part in this event from the Inter-American Development Bank. We're here to moderate the session. I think that there's a lot of things to be learned that we'll be able to exchange. The session for today deals with poverty and inequality and what the strategies are that we may identify so as not to leave anyone behind. Okay, I was asked to give a brief introduction to the subject. We're going to talk about inequality, what the optimal level of inequality is. I think that it's obvious that in Latin America, inequality is huge. Inequality is an obstacle to development. Beyond theoretical issues, having levels of inequality where there's a structural component of exclusion and people who don't have the opportunity to develop and develop their own skills is something that should be a reason for concern for all of us. And this invites us to think. And I know that that we have people from Peru, and it's interesting how the strategy in Peru went from being a strategy of growing to one of including in order to grow. It's important, the fact that we should have inclusion as a process that is going to feed the growth and development of the various countries. We're going to talk about monetary poverty and multidimensional poverty. 10 or 15 years ago, it was quite clear to say poverty is an incapacity to generate revenues so as to buy a certain basket of services and goods. We have coincided in the sense that poverty has multiple causes and that it shows multiple manifestations. This invites us to think about multidimensional poverty and see what its origins are and where it shows up and how it impacts the lives of people. Even so, income continues to be one of these dimensions, income or revenue. And this morning we saw that monetary extreme poverty globally is approximately 10%. Multidimensional poverty is greater. It's 20%. So, even though, and going back to the Mexican case, we see that people who live in extreme poverty are living in better conditions than the way they lived 10 or 20 years back because some of their needs have been satisfied. The issue of the ability to generate revenues to be autonomous and really exercise their rights is an essential issue that we cannot neglect. And we also have here something that has come a lot regarding social protection. We have a process and we have this protection against risks. There are numerous risks of natural disasters, disasters caused by human activities, climate change, which will present more risks. And there are instruments. An instrument cannot do everything by itself, but there are instruments to cope with these risks. So without any further preamble or ado, since already the members of the panel have been introduced, now the mechanics is going to be one question for each panel member so that they may answer in about 2 to 3 minutes. Then we will hold another round, and then we'll go and take up questions from our audience. Okay, so on my behalf, I would like to extend my welcome to all my peers here, and it's a pleasure to be with you. So let's start then in the order in which I was given the names here in the table. We're going to have Mr. Jolliffe, an economist from the World Bank, and the question is, and with the global perspective you might offer. The countries are monitoring, each one monitoring poverty according to priorities and national definitions. National priorities and national definitions. How can international measurements of poverty, such as what the World Bank has put out, help to inform public policies, which are, of course, conditioned by peculiar national needs from each country? Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación para estar en este debate. Es una maravillosa oportunidad para intercambiar puntos de vista y para que aprendan.
And in fact, in some ways, that's a little bit of what this interplay is between global and national measures, is trying to learn. Sorry. Okay, got it. And so thank you very much for inviting me to this, this discussion today. It's a wonderful way to learn from each other, the experiences in our countries and from the work that we do. In some ways, it's that exchange of information that sort of gets at exactly this interplay between global and national poverty measures that I think is the main benefit of having both sets of poverty measures. So it's clear that the policy priorities in each and every country should be driven by their own national measures of poverty. Those should be the foundations upon which countries focus. They're tailored to their particular needs, and those are going to be the tools that will best help them to eradicate poverty in their own worlds, in their own countries. But the role that global measures can play is if each and every country is tailoring or creating specific measures for their particular needs, you can't easily make comparisons about how different countries are performing relative to each other. And that's really sort of the role that global measures can do, is that they aim to bring some harmony across countries in how we measure poverty. And that can be very helpful in two different ways. If I could just ask, so the slide up here is from our most recent release of the extreme poverty rates that we released about 2 weeks ago. And there's a couple of messages that are very clear coming out from this. One is that over the last 25 years, we've made tremendous progress in reducing extreme poverty. And when the World Bank refers to extreme poverty, we're talking about the proportion of people living on less than $1.90 per person per day. So in 1990, there were about 36% of the world lived on less than $1.90. Today, or in the most recent estimate from 2015, that's about 10%. So that's about, that's a little bit more than 1 billion fewer people living in extreme poverty today than in 1990. That also means that globally we've seen about a percentage point drop in extreme poverty each and every year. But when we look at our projections moving forward, we see that if we just project growth out for each country by their average over the last 10 years or so, we get nowhere close to a 3% target of extreme poverty, which the World Bank is aiming for 2030. We get poverty rates in 2030 that are much closer to 5% at that point. And when we look at the geographic profile or the regional profile, which is the right-hand figure there, that explains sort of what this slowdown is what's driving this slowdown. The world has made tremendous progress in most regions of the world in eliminating extreme poverty. Sub-Saharan Africa, that has not been the case. In fact, when we look at our projections for 2030 in Sub-Saharan Africa, and these projections are based on sort of what we call business as usual, countries just growing at their previous rates, our estimates are suggesting that about 87%, close to 9 out of every 10 people living in extreme poverty will be living in Sub-Saharan Africa. So that's a very clear message then that comes from these global measures. By being able to make comparisons across countries, we can clearly target what are the areas of particular need and focus. And so the point that we're making in this case is that this fight to end extreme poverty as measured by the $1.90 monetary measure of poverty is really going to be won or lost in Sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. And it's without those global measures, you can't find that sort of regional focus there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Muy bien, muchas gracias, Dean. Ahora le voy a preguntar.
I'm going to ask our friend from CEPAL, Simone Cecchini, and the question is, what's the optimal inequality rate? When we talk about inequality in general, a negative kind of a kind of connotation is given. So what's the idea for eradicating inequality? What's the optimal, or what should be the aspiration of the various countries? Well, the immediate answer would be that there are some types of inequalities that must be eradicated, and there are others that have to be only reduced. But before going into detail, I'd like to express my support to so that this panel may deal poverty and inequality, because these are two different phenomena, but they must be considered together. We cannot eradicate extreme poverty if we don't do something about inequality. And this is something that in the World Bank, as growth rates which are equal, we reduce inequality, or we have greater reductions in inequality. And then it wouldn't be desired reducing inequality when our country's poverty increases. I think that the issue of inequality is a novelty in the World Development Agenda. We have a goal number 10, objective number 10, which is inequality, which did not exist in the Millennium Objectives. So now, from CEPAL, we have a line of work that has come a long ways, because in our region, like Pablo said, structural inequality and beyond a focus of rights and social justice, it's something that holds our economy back. And so it's inefficiency in inequality. If we don't leave anyone behind, it's not some bureaucrat's invention. I think that it's important to say that there were studies of participation, ADT, Fort Worth. There was an NGO that visited several communities, and even in the communities where poverty was reduced, we could see that there was always a social group that was not involved in development. And everybody mentioned this issue about let nobody be left behind. So in development, it must be social development agenda that is inclusive. When we talk about inequality, we cannot think only about inequality of revenues or income for consumption. We have to think about the multiple dimensions of inequality. In the 2030 agenda itself, it is stated that we shouldn't leave anyone behind, well, because of sex, ethnic group, place of residence, age groups, and so on. So we are about for Latin America. We talk about the social inequality matrix. There are multiple dimensions of inequality expressed in various development areas: education, health, social protection, which is what has someone does here. And in Latin America, that inequality matrix is deeply rooted in the economic structures of our region, in their history, and in what we call a certain culture of privileges, making inequality something natural. We should naturalize inequalities. There are some inequalities from the focus of rights should be removed. If there are wage differences, or being a man or woman, an Indian, or somebody that's disabled, that cannot be admitted regarding health, education, and social protection. When we reach the issue of inequality of income for consumption, it becomes more complex, because we don't have internationally a goal that would say we have to reach a certain level, okay, the G coefficient. Yeah, but then we may see in the world that the most developed countries, beyond having a per capita income that's higher, they have a low G. So that's something important. One of the countries, according to the World Bank data, with less inequality in the world, Norway has 0.28 LG. in Latin America and Africa, which are among the most unequal regions in the world. We have several countries have these coefficients which are 0 to 0.5. So we see that we have to reduce these values. But very importantly, from the policy point of view, we must remember the Gini coefficient between Latin American countries and developed countries is that before the transfer of the states and tax regime, they're not really that different. Where we have the great difference is the redistributing action of the state. Countries such as Norway, the inequality goes down a great deal. In the labor market, of course, this is by means of taxes and money transfers. In Latin America, this impact is much less. So the message there is that we have to continue building a state of welfare and work towards this construction of the universal social protection systems, not only to eliminate poverty, but also to reduce inequalities. Well, thanks. I think that this last subject that you mentioned is essential. How in many Latin American countries, and now that several have been trying to come into the OCDE, you see that the distribution of income before public actions is quite similar to the OCDE average, and it's public actions which has no redistributing impact or very little in Latin America, and these are policy decisions that must be undertaken. And now we're going to two participants from two countries. They're going to tell us their experiences, not just those of us who are looking at theoretical issues. And we're going to start with Carminha de Brant Carvalho, who is the Social Assistance Minister from in Brazil. And here, the first question that I'm going to ask her is the same that I'm going to ask Raghvendra from India, and it's going to be quite interesting to see their various reactions. And it goes on the issue of the implications of the multidimensional part of poverty as on policy and its design. That is how we should coordinate the various institutions having to do with these dimensions in order for public policy to be exercised. Thanks. I speak in Portuñol, so excuse me because I don't know how to speak Spanish well. I would like to thank for this invitation to speak in this panel and answer these questions. I would also like to greet all of you, and Mexico in particular, where we can see which has had a very positive impact upon us. And regarding your question, I'd like to state that it's quite important to measure and to have a monetary register records of all the issues regarding the poor, because poverty is multidimensional. And in this regard, and in Brazil, which is my country, we have to start with just a single statistics, a single, we have a high registration that has been stated of 27 million families or households in a situation of poverty and social vulnerability. And by means of this registration, federal government and the local governments are guided in order to formulate a policy, a social protection policy, which is more orderly and goes more and is more in depth. So we have 40 social programs for the people, for the families inscribed in this single set of statistics. And also in our country, we have several databases in order to monitor the impacts and the effects of the public policies on the conditions of poverty. But I would also like to say that poverty is not something static. It's not a static fact. It depends on the economic juncture, and and it has limits. We had certain limits, and we had an economic boom in certain times. But right now, we are experiencing a significant reduction of poverty, and starting in the year 2014, we're living a great economic crisis, a huge fiscal deficit, and enormous unemployment, huge unemployment. So poverty has increased. In this regard, and in order for you to have an idea, in Brazil, for example, we have 4% of the population lives in extreme poverty. The rest are are going through a relative multidimensional poverty. In order to face this situation, we have some programs which are quite important for transfers of revenues, and which are conditioned. These transfers are today of 13 million households or families which are covered by this program known as for Brazilian families, which is quite similar to the Mexican program known as Prospera. Something else that's quite relevant is that our social protection basket involves the food insurance and productive inclusion, and then first childhood, because we understand very well that is first childhood or first infancy, the families having very small children that have to be fed and have to be protected so as not to reproduce poverty. And something, another action is social assistance, that we should provide social benefits destined to those families which which are not covered by these 14 million families. Something else in order to bring this, I talk too much, excuse me, I apologize. We do not credit, we don't think it's possible to fight and eliminate poverty in our country, because the social inequalities are enormous, and like someone has said, they're historical. In Brazil, there's a culture of privileges, and it's the acceptance and the naturalization, let us say, of poverty. For us, it's something natural, and this on account of inequalities. Those inequalities that poverty has been produced. For example, in education, in order to understand this thoroughly, we have these conditioned transfers, but we have managed for all children and teenagers to have access to schools and to education. And yet, what has been learned does not occur on account of inequalities. School for the wealthy is very good. School for the poor is very precarious. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Carmiña. If you have any question or comment, please raise your hand and we'll give you one of our slips. So please write down who the question is addressed to, what the question is, and the question. And I would also like to tell you that you may invite your colleagues in your offices to join this conversation, this dialogue, because now this is in line, and you may check it and that's known as socialprotection.org, and social protection in socialprotection.org, and there you have the possibility through which you may invite your colleagues so that they may follow this conversation online. And if you want to listen once again to Carmiña's speeches or any one of the other speech, you'll find this recording in this same site where the detailed program can be found, and you may get into the program, and there you may look at the conversations that will take place either today or tomorrow. So there's the invitation. And for those who are here, we have 96 people connected in English, and we have 40 people connected in Spanish. So if those who are looking at us have questions, the chat is active so that we may get your questions. And of course, we won't be able to address all of them. We'll try to classify them and select them to make them available for our panel members. So Pablo, I'm going to give you back the mic now. Now, let's go with Raghvendra Singh. He is the director of the Mahatma Gandhi program for guaranteed employment in rural areas. He asked me to explain a bit that this program is really like an insignia in social protection of India. It has a coverage last year of 250 million people who were the beneficiaries. This is 20% of the population. It's a program focused on rural areas. It's a program that makes transfers, and it guarantees a job, but also a job they have a benefit for working that should be tangible and measurable, and which implies assets for the community. So it's employment that seeks to contribute on a short-term basis by means of transfers to the families, but also develop assets within the communities. And it has an interesting structure because up to there may be, the families may work up to 100 days a week. So it's a working family, but with a maximum of 100 days. And the idea, it's a federal program, but it really has a presence in the territories where the peculiarities within the various territories regarding the jobs that are going to be available. But it's a different paradigm. It's quite interesting. And since 2005, well, it's had already a long history, and numerous studies and evaluations, assessments have been done, and it's something that we may benefit from in getting to be more acquainted with. The first question is that I'm going to ask him is regarding the implications of multidimensional measurement of the poverty over public policy and the interinstitutional coordination. Thanks very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Cecchini and GIZ to arranging this and give me the opportunity to speak all of you. My dear friends, as we all are discussing for the last 3 days, to have a concrete plan to address the poverty, so we should have a concrete data to whom we have to support. In that direction, very recent, up to recent years, India is following a measure of poverty is below poverty level is a theme which was done. And it is nothing but an economic benchmark which identified that the family is not having the economic capacity to sustain their life. And it identified the individual and households who needs the help. And it is done by the states, and it is nothing but it's based on per capita income of the individual and households. And some states also include in that BPL level of they are having toilets or they are having SSM. So these are up to 2002 we have did the survey. But what we find in India that it is not enough to have a data to support the program. So we did socio-economic cost census in 2011. In India, as per Census Act 1948, we have to do the census every 10 years. So, and the Ministry of Home Affairs is responsible for carrying out the census. In 2011, with that census, we did the census on socio-economic data, and first time we ranked the household based on the predefined parameters, which I will tell you later, predefined parameters. And it is done for rural area and urban area also. The overall coordination of this census is done by our ministry, Department of Rural Development, Government of India. And for urban area is the Ministry of Urban has carried out that urban census. And caste census was done by Ministry of Home Affairs. This census is being carried out by survey of all the houses, door-to-door survey, and then data is available to control, to give the support or not to give the support based on that. And this has 3 objectives. First was to enable household to be ranked based on their socio-economic status. Second was to make available authentic information that will enable caste-wise populations. And third is to make available authentic information regarding the socio-economic conditions like education status of various households. My dear friends, first we have to, so this gave us to support the poorest of poor. The data is regarding the income, household status, type, deprivation parameter obtained. So in this, we have 7 deprivation indicators. And that indicators comes the household having only 1 room with kacha, means that they are not concrete house and not, the roof is not permanent. So that is one indicator, the house. Then second is no adult member between age 16 to 59. The house is not having any adult member between 16 to 59 years, means that they are all above 59. Then female-headed household with no adult male member between 16 to 59. Disabled member and no able-bodied adult member. SC and ST, vulnerable households. Number of illiterate adults between above 25 years. And 7 is landless household. The people are not having any land and deriving their major part of income from manual casual labor. Means on daily basis they have to go some work, they will earn and they will feed their family. These are the 7 parameters were collected from all the households. And of course, though it was done in 2011, but the system is in place if someone left, so how their name can be included. And my dear friends, I am telling you this because we are using this data. You must have heard that we are running a Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, where a vision is that by 2022, all people who are not having a pakka house will have a house. So this data is being used because we cannot make house in a 1 year for all. So this SEC data is being a benchmark for that. And based on that, the lists are being made who will get house this year, who will get house the next year. But the vision is by 2022, everybody should have a house. Same is being used for giving the pensions, because the households who are not having any earned member, so it is being used for pensions. The livelihood programs, it is again the data is being used. And in the scheme, which just told that Mahatma Gandhi NREGA Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, in that scheme, we ensure that the 7, which I have told, landless people who are dependent on manual casual labor, so they must have the job card. The job card means that is essential for doing the work in Mahatma Gandhi NREGA. So around 54 million in that census comes that people of 54 millions in India, they are not having any land, and they are wholly dependent on the casual work. So in that is given to the stakeholder of the state to give their job card who are willing to get the job card. So that way it helps. Very recent, 2 years back, a scheme was launched for giving LPG gas cylinders to the rural household for making food. That is called Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala scheme. In that scheme also, the SEC data is used. The person who are having a SEC data in the list, they are given the free gas connections, means their security charge was not given, and that scheme was there. Then one other scheme where that Pradhan Mantri Saubhagya scheme, that is the people who are not having the electric connections, the free of cost electric connection was given. So for that also this data is being used. So in a nutshell, I can say that this data is helping India to address the multidimensional poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bueno, sin duda que hemos tenido una primera ronda muy interesante. Yo quisiera destacar tanto de la experiencia brasileña como de la experiencia en la India, la importancia de contar
the importance of having all these records of data to notice and to detect what are the specific needs and address all these policies for that and their monitoring. In the Brazilian case, I think it's quite interesting to see that the families would self-report the information, and I also have understood that they are doing it periodically. We know that the poverty, it can flow, situations can change, and as the families are updating this information every 2 years, and it's quite valuable. And the fact that they are doing it and they just have the declaration, so the country would have a lot of databases and a lot of ways to validate this information, I think is quite priceless. In the case of India, and how to get that information, would allow to build policies and programs according to those needs, because in a country as the size of India, we have a huge inequality domestically speaking and regionally speaking, so we can create different policies for those needs. So now let's move on with the questions to our speakers. Now, I would like to ask, because we are talking about how to measure poverty, if the consumption can improve the multidimensional measurement of these policies, and if this consumption can be helpful for improving or enhancing these policies based on these measurements. Muchas gracias.
So, excuse me. When the World Bank first started reporting on global extreme poverty, so the first efforts were back in 1990 when we had the $1 a day line, there was this sort of fundamental sense of that exercise that making sure that people had enough to eat, that they had shelter to live in, that they had clothing was sort of a fundamental priority. And it's for that reason that we have been monitoring this measure of extreme poverty, which is essentially about how much are you able to consume in terms of food and non-food items over the last 25 years. But now we're in a world where really the majority of countries in the world have extreme poverty rates that are well below 3%. And as we look out into the future, we really see a picture of most of the world with poverty rates, extreme poverty rates under 2%, while sub-Saharan Africa continues to have very high prevalence rates. And yet, even in those countries where we know that extreme poverty is very low, we know that many people in these countries suffer from deprivations in many different ways. And we think it's because of this that in these countries, this picture of just consumption poverty alone isn't adequate to provide a portrayal of what it means to be poor in these countries. So we're starting to introduce a larger set of poverty measures that will track globally, and one of them is the multidimensional poverty measure. But we are linking our multidimensional poverty measure, we're resting it on the consumption foundation, in part because our focus has been on consumption, but also we think that it's important to recognize that the value that the multidimensional poverty measure has is it helps us to understand the interactions and the overlaps of deprivations in these different dimensions. And by linking it directly to consumption, we can understand how those overlaps interplay with that fundamental consumption measure. And so the easy sort of answers of how can policy potentially change is in those areas where there really are no overlaps between consumption poverty and the other non-monetary dimensions of poverty, well, then we know that in terms of targeting our programs, if we focus only on consumption, we're really missing large populations who are deprived in important ways. In contrast, in countries where we see strong overlaps, we know that we're doing fine in terms of targeting the right people, but our policies probably aren't refined enough to understand the ways in which they're deprived. And so it's that overlap with consumption poverty that really helps us to understand, is this fundamentally about targeting issues, or is it much more about recognizing the depth of poverty in countries with high overlaps? And I'll just make sort of one comment, is that we're about to release, say, in October 17th, a report that will provide this measure of the multidimensional poverty measure that connects to consumption for about 119 countries. And we do find that there's just tremendous variation in terms of the amount of overlaps. So if we think about sort of, there is no easy answer in terms of global policy. It really will come down to sort of, again, differences across regions and nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Entonces, bueno, muy interesantes. Vamos a estar pendientes del.
We are going to be waiting and looking forward this 17th of October publication and to see how it is per consumption, and for the same level of poverty per consumption will have a very important variability in the multidimensional poverty. Simon, if you can tell us a little bit about labor and financial inclusion as an element to reduce poverty in Latin America. Thank you very much, Pablo. The essence of inclusion of labor and production policies and the different actions they would have for being included in the productive world, as well as all the groups that have been left behind, is to fight back all these inequalities in the labor market rather than to reduce the unemployment rates. That will be the short answer. First of all, I think it's important to provide a definition of what we're talking about when we talk about financial inclusion. In CEPAL, we have a database for Latin America and the Caribbean. We also have tracked more than 70 programs in the region where basically we have seen a lot of programs that are trying to strengthen the labor offer and the demand of jobs. Those programs that try to strengthen that offer would be those migration and school programs. There are a lot of young adults or adults that haven't finished elementary or school or junior high school. And we need to look at although they have finished the education system, they need to conclude their studies. There are a lot of training programs for the labor market, and all these programs are going to strengthen the labor offer for specific groups. Many times the poor, some others are young people, others women. Also in Latin America, what we can see is a lot of programs for independent work, such as microcredits, to incentivize micro entrepreneurial actions, and also would depend on the direct generation of employment, or more recently these natural disasters, and we have all these programs to high with a very low income or low salary. And finally, all these programs for indirect creation of jobs. For instance, some subsidiaries that could be provided to companies so they can hire vulnerable youngs or vulnerable groups. This is a program for labor and productive inclusion. What we see from the ECLAC is that in the Latin American and the Caribbean, it has increased a lot. We have a trend of that, and it has increased the interest for this labor and productive sector, because in the last 20 years we've been quite successful in what we call the money transfer, but we still have to talk deeper or in further detail the labor transference, and also to see what is the links between the social and the productive. Even we were talking about the double inclusion. That means that from the social policy we need to keep promoting the access to social services, education, health, and also to provide certain floor of protection. We also need to look the labor inclusion aspect. That is why we have this stylistic operation of the social services and labor inclusion in the formal sector. And that data is really a concern, because it's that double inclusion aspect in the region that is only 3 out of 10 households. So it makes us to have, or forces us to have, a broadened perspective of all these series of groups of vulnerable people that could not reach to have a direct contact to the labor market. And we know that a lot of the income of the country can come from the informal employment or jobs. Also, another thing that we need to consider is the impact assessment, not as much for the money transfer, but also we have seen 36 impact assessments in 21 programs in 8 countries, and we can say that in a meta-analysis, around 40% of the cases, the indicators that are statistically significant have a positive reaction for the labor market and inclusion. There is a population of young people that are in action in Colombia that have training programs, and we can see that the salaries that have come from those programs are 12% higher than those who haven't participated in that type of programs. And they have participated in these formal contracts, and it can increase up to 5%. There are some aspects, of course, but the assessment of those programs is still a pending challenge in the region. If we want all these programs to contribute and to reduce the gaps and close all these gaps in the labor market, on one side we need to have the link of what is a decent job. For instance, if we have these programs for supporting independent or freelancers, we need to find the ways to promote this formalization. There are some in Latin America. In Brazil, we have the MAID program, the monotributo in Argentina. So there are some possibilities to take all these people to the formal employment back. Also, the creation of all these policies to make these programs more effective, and we should think in this unique window. I talk about the offer, how to strengthen that offer and the demand, but we need to make a match of this intermediation process. So the social policy of the countries have done something such as Prospera, trying to link different programs to coordinate also all of these factors. In Chile, we have the social support. This is another pending challenge. Also, we have this unique window of Ventanilla Única, and this is to find all these productive features and to have this unique registry in Brazil to make all these public policies. Thank you very much. Now moving to Carminha, in the case of Brazil, we are interested in learning because we know that there are a lot of analyses performed in Brazil, not only with the families and also with the transfers that have allowed to reduce poverty among elderly. So how all these programs are going to be linked to other programs, taking into account the multidimensional measurement. So let's say if you can give us a little bit more information about the multisectorial policies implementation. Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. In Brazil, we have since 1988, the warranty or the right of for the elderly that are above 65 years old, and they have a minimum salary per month that is going to be warranty for their survival. If that person, that elderly person, is with a very low income. Disabled people as well that cannot achieve to have an inclusion also have the right of a minimum salary. For these two groups, we already have 4.5 million of beneficiaries of this type of policies. I think it is always coming from the concern of how to set this benefit with a very social protection feeling and perspective in the different sectors. So for disabled people, we have a concern, and as well as the different interventions, so children and young people with disabilities are already included to this education. Others, if manage to achieve a job that could be at that particular job. So this is as a concern of the different sectors. I would like to stress that on the other side, we do have some programs for elderly people, and even we can provide food for those who have been abandoned. Therefore, we have different centers to keep the elderly or the disabled people in two different reasons, so they can obtain the rehabilitation and they can meet others, but always thinking that we cannot stop offering the possibility of humanization of their lives. On the other hand, we have a program that is quite big for the first infancy or the children. So we have understood that it's not enough to have all these centers for children, for small children, and we want to resolve all the problems in Brazil with the people that are very poor. So there is a social protection program for the first years of childhood that if it's in the household from the families that are very poor with children that are very small. So this program, through the visitors or like social workers, would go to the households of those families and would help the family to understand the importance of the loving bonds, and as well as the motor, cognitive stimulation, so those children do not reproduce poverty. And then they would have more warranties for obtaining or for getting all the future opportunities such as work, life, and education. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carmina. I think you are nailing that particular point of inequalities, and that could be seen and measured at that early stage of life. And we could have also public policies for children addressed to those that are more vulnerable from the beginning by visiting households. And I think that's fundamental and essential. And it has also been supported with documents. And it's important for all those public policies to have these attention schemes for childhood. In order to close our round of questions, I would like to go to Rashid, if he can tell us how all these programs of public employment managed by the Mahatma Gandhi program could be served as tools or instruments to fight back extreme poverty and not leave anybody behind.
India has, before that, this program, India has several programs for the rural area, but they have some limitation in quantum of reach and their output. In 2005, Government of India passed an act, a law, through which the name is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And through this act, a scheme is launched in phased manner throughout India. It started in 2006 and 2007, 200 rural districts. Then it goes in phase 2, 2007, 2008, and April 1, 2008, it is operational in all rural districts of India, and around 685 districts and 262,000 village council. Through this scheme is there. This scheme is a right-based and universal. Through this scheme, in a financial year, a household who is registered, so any rural household can get registered in this program who is willing to do unskilled work. And each financial year, a minimum of 100 days employment will be provided. As of now, around 128 million households are registered, and around household registered means that in one household maybe 2 may be working or 3 may be working. So as of now, 250 million people are working in a year. Current year, we are having a budget of $7.5 billion for this scheme from the Government of India. And in material component, our partners state give contribution. So this is how it acts. It is giving a decentralized planning, means that planning starts from the village level, and then it is culminated at the center level. And then, okay. And the work which has to be done, it has already listed through the Act schedule. And you know that India, that majority of people are dependent on agriculture, and mostly agriculture are dependent on rain. So in this Act, there are 164 type of work which support agriculture. And also the focus are on natural resource management. So around 181 works which are out of 260 works which can be done through this is of natural resource management. Here the scheme works like that. The self of work means works are available. People has to demand the work. They have to register their demand. They want a work, who are registered with a job card. Then they will demand the work, and the work has to be given in 15 days. If it is not given in 15 days, they are entitled for getting an unemployment allowance. And it is 25% of the notified wage rate. Every year, the wage in all the states are notified by the government of India based on the index, rural index. And if after completion of work, he has to get the wage within 15 days. If he is not getting 15 days, then he is again entitled for delay payment. So that's how it works. And mandatory, there is a 33% women participation should be there. So as of now, around 53% women participation in there in this scheme. And it has also that the vulnerable household, those who are having the lands but not able to, the land is not fertile because of lack of water or the land conditions are not good. So this act also support that in this work, their land may become usable and the water facility can be made to their land. So I'm proud to say that India of last 3 years, they are having enough grain production to support the whole populations. Through our PDS scheme, we are giving the grains at the lower cost to the people who are registered in their, as per that data. Then it comes to the implementation. The digital form means the wage to the account of beneficiary goes directly from the Government of India, from Delhi. All the beneficiaries are registered with their bank account and money goes electronically to their account. You can understand the quantum, 25 million people have to be given. So that is there. And we are having to monitor the program online management information system. We can drill down to the GP, to the people, to the work, to most everything, and it is on open public domain. Anybody can see this. We are also having the assets, which I have told, because people are earning and they are making assets in their village, for which they are getting indirect benefit. So all the assets, as of now, around 3.6 crores of assets are being made, and all the assets, even anybody can see in our web portal, it is geotagged with the information, means that disclosure, because program, anybody can see the assets. Even we have made an app where public can give the feedback about the assets, whether assets are good or it is of use or not. And that data is being analyzed by us at the Government of India, and we are giving the feedback to the states. And it is also having impact of 6 SDGs out of 11 targets for this. So this, we hope that with this program, maybe in near future, we'll make a lot of assets which will be sustainable and people will come out of poverty. Thank you.
Una presentación muy interesante.
It was quite an interesting presentation, several points to emphasize. One of them is a program, as you may have seen. It's a law or it's a policy that's been established. It's not a policy. It's not, well, a state policy which has at the same time, it has a guarantee approach. People that require the program can approach. This is complemented with this unemployment insurance, considering the places where there is no job offer. for people. The issue about the women's participation, which is more than half the working population, and the linking established. This is one of the recent aims that has been incorporated. We're also developing assets, and this is highly relevant in rural development. And finally, making direct transfers so as to achieve, to make more efficient program management, and at the same time accomplish financial inclusion elements. Well, I have some questions here, and just to say me there are further questions, please send them to me. The first one is for Carmiña, and it's a very operational question. What mechanisms do you implement in order to provide incentives for the population to register in this national register, and in order for them to give true information, because that's, how do you validate such information? This question is very interesting and very good. We have in all the municipalities and local governments, we have workers that look for the people, the families, the households, so that they may subscribe into this registration. This was not too difficult for us because the population in a situation of vulnerability or poverty try to go to the social assistance centers, or either to ask for a monetary complement or help, or to ask for services such as housing and others. And even with that method for the population, that since they have to look for a social assistance center, and then they should become a part of this national statistic that is taken. Now, if we go some self-declared people, but I think that I can imagine that they are true, that they are accurate, because we have ways to cross these these data with other registrations from the country in order to verify if there is information that this family, certain households, for example, may say that they aren't included. Now, concerning those 13 or 14 million, families or households that we know that receive these cash transfers, it was possible to cross them, and out of these, barely 4 or 5%, 3.5% have committed frauds. That is by giving untrue information. And in the case of the others, the informations were correct. But all of this is a reason of pride for whoever works in social protection, or to say that we're in a tangible situation of poverty, but that they have things which can help us to really situate them truly. I think that the fact of demythifying, removing myths, for example, when the transfer programs came about, how would families use the money, how would they spend it, and we know from a lot of evidence that they know very well how to use the money and how to invest it on family needs or the household needs, education and health as well, and this is about how to generate, how to invite the population to participate and report the information. It's quite interesting as well. And Simone, a question that we have been asked for you, and this is from the regional perspective that you have seen from CEPAL. What are the experiences or measures that might favor the development of social policies that will be ever further removed from just being mere assistances? How have you consolidated elements or have policies which are more, which are better established or more consolidated? Yes, thanks, Pablo. I think that we can always analyze the situation of social policies and look at a glass half empty or half full. But I'm more optimistic in the sense that in the region and throughout these last 20 years, we've made quite a bit of progress, not only as far as the rhetoric of rights, but also in their making them operable, or making them work. What am I talking about that? Well, there's a tradition of social policies and with corruption. I'm not saying that this has disappeared. We know about the cases which continue to occur in our country, but there have been important changes. When do we look at social policies, considering the rights of the beneficiaries? Well, in practice, we don't know if a policy is focused or is aimed at certain rights. For example, if we're trying to make our benefits more universal. And in that regard, there are programs that, for example, if they propose covering the poorer population, they are managing, because I said there's a set of quite specific mechanisms to choose just at random, but rather to choose who's going to participate in the program. Okay, and here we have a group that's been exemplary in that regard, and this is a patrimony or heritage, this the unique registrations, and these are the spinal column of the social welfare system. We may change it, but that's something that will be left with continuity, and we also have a focus regarding the law, so that we have numerous more examples. For example, at the end of transparency and everything that has been done as far as innovating the programs. Mexico has been quite exemplary in this regard, and also not to discriminate towards certain groups or to, being active. For example, Brazil is looking for an asset of a person, or policies that seems to go towards a greater inclusion. So we're going to face the challenges, but to them, I won't be a little bit longer. We have publications where we have a set of analyses that show that there's something that we have built upon. We have to make progress, but we have to defend what has been done so far. This is part of the CEPAL's conference. We still have to make progress in coverages, improve the benefits, and not cut down just for cutting or doing away with something. I just want to thank our panel members. I think that we're within the time allotted to us. It's being quite an interesting panel, and we'll meet again later. All of us are invited to our luncheon. This is going to be on the second floor in the rooms here in the dining halls, and we'll meet again at 1:30.